بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان. That the month of Ramadan is the one in which the Quran was revealed as guidance for mankind and as clear signs that show the right way and distinguish between right and wrong. So today I would like to discuss the importance of the Quran and the relationship the believers should have with the Quran. Unfortunately, in this day and age, the Quran is a book that has been left to the side in our homes, where outside of Ramadan it is seldom recited, understood, and it is the cause of loss in our lives which we do not realize. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تلهكم أموالكم ولا أولادكم عن ذكر الله ومن يفعل ذلك فأولئك هم الخاسرون. O you who believe, your riches and your children must not divert you from the remembrance of Allah, and those who do that are the losers. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a clear warning. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions wealth and children here because these are the two things we busy our lives with every single day. We go out for a living to earn wealth, and the children that have been given to us, we spend most of our time with them. What we do not realize, even though we know, the realization is different. That the wealth that you have received is given to you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ar-Razzaq. He is the one who provides. You make the effort, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who gives. And the children you love so much, it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who has given you those children. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not saying neglect your looking for your wealth or raising your children or being with your children. Allah is saying, do not let them distract you from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do not let them distract you. Why? And this is a clear warning that if you do, meaning you go in extreme and you forget about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala completely in your lives, then you will be one of the losers. You will be one of the losers. And in relation to the Quran, we need to bring this back into our lives. This is a divine word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is a living miracle that is amongst us, which unfortunately we lack care of it in our lives. This is a big problem in our society. The Quran is divine guidance. I mentioned at the beginning that it was revealed in the month of Ramadan for what? A guidance for mankind. And that differentiates between right and wrong. It teaches us the difference between right and wrong. It is an instruction manual for us to how we should live our lives. This is the Quran. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. If you remember my last lecture, we spoke about taqwa, the muttaqun. Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, this book is a guidance for the muttaqeen. So what you will receive from the Quran depends on the state of your heart. What you receive from the Quran is dependent on the state of your heart. If you recite the Quran or you read the Quran to find mistakes in it or to find faults in it, then you will not receive the guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran regarding this وَنُنَزِّلُ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ مَا هُوَ شِفَاءٌ وَرَحْمَةٌ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَلَا يَزِيدُ الظَّالِمِينَ إِلَّا خَسَارًا. That the Quran is a shifa, a healer and a mercy. But also for people who want to find fault in the Quran, it is a means of disease that they continue finding faults in the Quran even though they cannot find any. What your state of heart is, you will find from the Quran. If you have an open heart and you make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide you, Ya Allah, guide me through the Quran, Allah will guide you. Meanings will open up to you. You will begin to understand what is required from you. There are many things in the Quran which we can take lesson from. For example, in the first few surahs which we have covered, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the signs of who the believers are, who the kuffar are, who the hypocrites are in great detail. Allah mentioned their psychology, how they work, and how we can relate to these people today. Because the same Muslims, mu'mins, the same kuffar and the same munafiqeen exist today. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has described them to us in great detail. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes to us Bani Israel. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes us how they behaved with their prophets, how they behaved in general, how they were the chosen ones of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but then they disobeyed Allah and Allah moved them away from His love because of their constant disobedience. And how those ayats of the Quran regarding the Jews and the Christians and Bani Israel are relevant today. Allah described their psychology. This is all mentioned in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned the stories of the prophets and how they went through a very difficult time with their people who rejected them, who abused them, who mocked them. And you find that when you go out of your way to practice your religion, you will also find these obstacles, especially when you try to propagate the religion. There will always be people against you, opposing you, questioning your sincerity, questioning your intentions. Always. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned this. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also shows you that He gives people time to change. When the time comes for Allah to grip you, Allah will grip you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also mentioned the Day of Judgment and how everyone will be gathered and how we will be questioned and how there will be no escape. That every dharra, every atom's worth of good or bad that you did, you will see on that day. Allah is warning us. Allah also gives us good news for the believers. The paradise is described. Many things are mentioned in the Quran. The Quran is also a healer. The Quran is also a healer for the hearts. It brings peace to the heart if recited. Even if you recite without translation, it brings peace to the heart. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَتَطْمَئِنُّ قُلُوبُهُمْ بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبُ. The ones who believe and their hearts are peaceful with the remembrance of Allah. Listen, the hearts find peace only in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's like a challenge as well. If you want to find peace elsewhere, go ahead and try to find it. But you will not find peace anywhere except through the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We see many signs of that today. Many successful people in life who have much wealth, much fame, but many of them fall into depression. The wealth that they've amassed does not find them happiness. It does not give them contentment of the heart. Allah says only in Allah's zikr do hearts find peace. Only. And you'll find the awliya, the friends of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they also went through very tough times, but they were always content. Why? Because they were in constant zikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And no matter what came in their way, they always had tawakkul, reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because of the zikr, that constant remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Quran mentions many other things to do with finances. As Imam Sahib said yesterday, inheritance is such a big topic. Yet many people lack knowledge in this topic, and you see many fights and squabbles within families because of a lack of knowledge on inheritance. People have become so ignorant, they are asking for their parents' inheritance before they even died. How can you ask for something which is not even yours in the first place? The Quran removes this kind of jahiliyyah. It mentions inheritance and exactly how much everyone should get. It also mentions that if you borrow money from somebody, and this is over 1400 years ago, that you should write down a small contract between both of you, and you should have a third party, and you should all sign in front of each other. Unfortunately, we've left that practice today, but the non-Muslims have taken that practice on board. You go to the bank, you borrow money, you have to sign so many things. Look, this is the Quran, a divine revelation which we have no care of. So much to understand, so much to take from it, but we have no attachment to it. Unfortunately, this is what we've become, and we've allowed our distraction to get the better of us. I do not have time. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who created time. Allah is the one who created time. And if Allah wants to take that time away from you, He will take it from you. And those things that you coveted your entire life will not be of any avail to you. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes that time away from you because you had no time, then you will cry. Then you will say, I wish I had more time. I wish and I wish. The Quran should not be that book that should be left in the bookshelf to gather dust. We should, even if we recite it a small amount per day, understand with translation the small amount per day, read its commentary, invest. We invest in so many things in life, whether it's properties, land, many other things. Invest in the Quran. Invest in the commentary of the Quran. Understand the Quran. Invest in your Islam. In reality, you're investing in your akhirat. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and in the Hadith al-Qudsi it's mentioned, O son of Adam, you spend on me, I will spend on you. Subhanallah. You spend on me, I will spend on you. And if you do not understand certain things from the Quran, this is what the ulama are here for, to answer your questions. Allah says in the Quran, ask those who know if you do not know. We need to understand and realize that we need to be attached to the Quran. The Quran is our guide. We should not only confine it to the month of Ramadan. We should open it, like I said, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in a hadith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves those things even if they're small but done consistently. Small but consistently. Even if you recite a few verses with understanding, not only will it increase your intellectual capacity, but it will increase your spiritual capacity and your emotional capacity and your psychological capacity. It's a miracle, a living miracle. We do not realize how much of an impact it has upon us. You increase intellectual capacity by getting knowledge, increasing knowledge. You increase spiritual capacity where the Quran removes the dirt from your heart. The Quran will remove that dirt from your heart, and as it purifies you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will remove the mist from your mind. And as this happens, you will begin to understand even more. And that's how passion grows, that's how love grows. You have to start somewhere. By making excuses, you're only making excuses for yourself. But these excuses will not hold in the grave or on the day of judgment. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala pour the love of the Quran in our hearts.
Ameen.
May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the understanding of the Quran.
Ameen.
May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us that attachment and love to the Quran and to the ulama who help us understand the Quran.
Ameen.
سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاكم الله خيرا.